Okay, good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining. This class is in the merit of all the Jewish people, especially those in the land of Israel, those that need healing, those that need safety, security, rescuing, success, gotcha, and everything that they need. If you'd like to sponsor a class, sponsorships are available. You can contact us. We appreciate it. It helps us continue to do these classes and make them available. So thank you for the sponsors, and let's jump right in. This week's Torah portion is Parsha Yisro, and it's the talks about Jethro, the father-in-law of Moses. It also has the Ten Commandments and the giving of the Torah on Mount Sinai, which we'll talk a little bit about in a different context. So let's get into how this Torah portion starts. So Jethro comes to Moses, comes to the Jewish people. Jethro, of course, lived in the land of Midian, and he comes to the desert because he says that he heard about the crossing of the Red Sea. He heard about the giving of the Torah, and he shows up to visit his daughter and son-in-law and his grandchildren, and to become a Jew. That's what he wants, is to become a Jew. So this is Exodus chapter 18 and chapter 18. So it says as follows: It came about on the next day that Moses sat down to judge the people, and the people stood before Moses from the morning until the evening. So Moses' father-in-law sees this, and he saw what he was doing to the people, and he said, "What is this that you're doing to the people? Why do you sit by yourself while all the people stand before you from morning till evening?" Moses said to his father-in-law, "The people come to me to seek God. If any of them has a case, he comes to me, and I judge between a man and his neighbor, and I make known the statutes of God and his teaching." So Moses says, it's very simple. Why am I here, and why are people lining up from morning to evening? They want to know what God says about judgments, about the Torah laws. Moses' father-in-law said to him, "What you are doing is not good. You will surely wear yourself out, and as well as all the people who are with you. The matter is too heavy for you. You cannot do it alone. Now listen to me. I will advise you, and may God be with you. You represent the people before God, and you shall bring the matters to God. You shall admonish them concerning the statutes and the teachings, and you shall make known to them the way they should, the way they shall go, and the deeds they shall do." And he says as follows: This is the advice Jethro gives. "You should choose out of the entire nation men of substance, God-fearers, men of truth, who hate monetary gain, and you shall appoint for the people of Israel leaders over thousands, leaders over hundreds, leaders over 50s, leaders over and leaders over tens. They shall judge the people at all times. Any major matter they shall bring to you, and they themselves shall judge every minor matter, thereby making it easier for you. And they shall bear the burden together with you. If you do this thing and God commands you, you will be able to survive, and all people will also come upon their place in peace." Okay, so he says like this. Jethro, and Rashi comments right away. He says, "May God be with you," which Jethro is saying, why don't you ask God to see what I'm saying? So he basically says, listen, you can't, all the Jewish people can't consult with you. They need multiple rabbis. You need multiple judges. He says make judges basically over tens, and then you have over 50s, over hundreds, over thousands. So that way, if you have a question, you go to your local judge, your local rabbi, and if he doesn't know the answer, goes up the chain. And then if they don't figure it out, they go up the chain, and you go to Moses. If Moses doesn't know, he goes to God. He continues, Moses obeyed his father-in-law, and he did all that he said. Moses chose men of substance out of all of Israel and appointed them as heads of the people, leaders of thousands, leaders of hundreds, leaders of 50s, leaders of tens. They would judge people at all times. Difficult case they would bring to Moses. Any minor case they themselves would judge. And then Moses' father-in-law leaves. So a very interesting thing happened, that Moses gets some advice and he listens to the advice. But the question is as follows: why didn't Moses think of this idea before? Why didn't he choose to delegate this? As Jethro said, this was too much to bear, seemingly, for Moses. Why didn't Moses think of this idea on himself? And not only the Moses doesn't come, but a guest, someone who comes from out of town, Moses' father-in-law, who was not Jewish, He figures it out, and God agrees to Moses to this suggestion. So obviously, he was onto something. There's a popular, I should say, a well-known Jewish phrase that says, "A guest who comes for a minute sees a long way, and sees a mile, sees for a mile." So what does that mean? It means sometimes people with an outside perspective have a little bit of a perspective that nobody else locally is noticing. But when you take a step back and you're coming from out of town, sometimes you have a good idea what's going on. So maybe Jethro was just, he had a different perspective. However, we can't say that. Why? Because Moses was chosen by God to lead the Jewish people. So did God make a mistake in choosing Moses? Moses didn't know what he could do. Did Moses make a mistake? He didn't understand that he wasn't physically capable of counseling all these people. And on the other hand, it must be that Moses thought, if we take that seriously, that the fact that God appointed Moses to lead the Jewish people, we must be that actually Moses thought he could. He could do it. Maybe he had to do it all himself. So what's going on here? And then, even take it even further. If Moses was right, Moses didn't think of the idea, then how could it be that Jethro was then correct and was adopted? That practice was adopted. Now, we have a very similar idea also when it comes to the giving of the Torah that is also in this week's Parsha. However, this is in the book of Deuteronomy, when Moses retells the story of the Jewish people getting the Torah. In the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 5, we have a similar idea where the Jewish people couldn't handle hearing all the 10 commandments from God himself, and only heard the first 2 commandments from God himself. The rest Moses had to repeat and tell them later. So again, similar idea that Moses thought that they could hear it from God. Then the Jewish people approach Moses, the elders approach Moses, and they say, "Moses, we cannot hear the word of God from himself." Let's read that inside. Again, this is in Deuteronomy. So he says, the Jewish people say, "So now, why should we die? For this great fire will consume us. If we continue to hear the voice of God, our God, anymore, we will die. For who is there of all flesh who heard the voice of the living God speaking from the midst of the fire as we have and lived?" And in fact, the Medrash says that actually the Jewish people did die twice, that every time God spoke, the Jewish people died, and they died twice after hearing each of the the first of the 2 commandments. And instead, the Jewish people say, "You should approach and hear all that God, our God, will say, and you should communicate to us that God, our God, will speak to you, and we will hear and do." So they say, "Why don't you listen to whatever God has to say and send it to us?" God consented to your words when you spoke to me, and God said, "I have heard the words that these people have said to you. Everything they said was good." And we see that God takes the side of the Jewish people. He doesn't take Moses' side. So again, a very similar idea, that we see that Moses is wrong twice. He's wrong about the Jewish people hearing directly from God, and he's wrong about Jewish people hearing directly from him. So what is going on here? Was Moses just a terrible judge of the Jewish people? That doesn't make any sense. So the question is, what was Moses thinking? And here we have a very interesting and fascinating idea that the Rabbi talks about and brings a totally different perspective. And he says Moses did not make a mistake. Moses was correct. The Jewish people, when Moses was with the Jewish people, he lifted them to his level. And Moses, at that point, the plan was that Moses is going to lead the Jewish people, and he's going to lead them to the promised land, and that's it. We're going to come to a messianic age. There's not going to be any more death or dying. Moses is going to live forever. The Jewish people are going to live forever, and he's going to lead them forever. And Moses had this ability to lift the Jewish people to his level. He had the ability that just like Moses had the ability to hear directly from God and communicate directly to God and not die, unlike any other prophet in Jewish history, unlike the Jewish people in his generation, Moses felt he could lift them up to that level. And the same thing. Now Moses thought he could lift them up if now that the Jewish people, they said, "No, we can't handle that on our own. On our own, we can't handle that." So he said, "Okay, I couldn't accomplish it by Mount Sinai. I couldn't lift the Jewish people up to my level. They weren't ready yet. But now that I'm teaching Torah, I'm teaching the Jewish people Torah, maybe I could get them at this point that every single Torah law they have to hear directly from me. They can't hear from anyone else. And if I could lift them up to my level, I can lift them up to a level where they can handle that, and I could handle it. I could be physically able to do it, and they could be physically able to do it. And in Hasidic thought, this idea is discussed as follows: there's a difference between there's a big difference between seeing and hearing. When you see something, an eyewitness, you can never convince someone that they didn't see it. He said, "What do you mean I saw? I saw it." And versus you hear about something, you could be convinced that maybe it's not true. Probably all the time, people are convinced that things that they heard about ended up not being true. Versus when you see something, you know that it happened. And that is the difference between Moses and the Jewish people. The Moses, or the people that Moses were to appoint. Moses heard from God himself. And therefore, he experienced godliness. He experienced the Torah on a level that no one else could. And Moses said, I want to bring the Jewish people up to my level. I want to make sure that it's not just that I'm just a reporter of the news and you're going to hear from me. No, he was bringing them up to his level. And therefore, he felt that he himself had to do it. And in fact, he could bring the Jewish people to his level. However, there was one problem. What was the problem? The problem was, so now let's take a step back. So if Moses was correct, that he could lift up the Jewish people, what was the problem? Jethro said, the Jewish people, you're not going to be here forever, Moses. You're going to pass away. And if you want the Jewish continuity, if you want that the Jewish people should always be able to study Torah, it can't be all resting on one person. You have to delegate. You have to make this bigger than yourself. Right now, at this point, he understood that Moses was the biggest bottleneck that all Torah flowed through Moses, and this had to change in order to create the next generation of the Jewish people, which would explain also why Moses didn't come up with this idea, because the plan, like we said earlier, the plan was that Moses was not going to pass away. The plan was that Moses was going to live forever. The plan was that Moses is going to bring the people to the promised land and go straight to Mashiach. God had other plans. God's plan was that obviously Moses was going to pass away and Joshua will lead the Jewish people to the promised land. And they would not be a messianic age. And they would have to go through hardship and one temple, two temples, to where we are now. And therefore, Moses had to take Jethro's advice. And the advice was that you have to delegate. You have to empower the people to get to you have to empower people to study Torah. You have to empower the people to be Jewish, even when Moses is no longer physically there. So what's the lesson we can learn from this? So number one is, there's the first thing we could see is that we could see the power of Moses, the power of a Jewish leader to bring someone to their level. And really Moses empowers every single Jew. Every single Jew has a spark of Moses in them. And you can lift up someone to see from a higher perspective. And that was true. Moses was correct that he could do that. However, he had to be physically there. That was the only issue. But the truth is that you could take someone and you can lift them up. You can bring them to your level to see it in your perspective. And that is something that Moses gave to every single one of us. So that's the second level. The first lesson, I should say. The second lesson is that we have to also empower other people to come and be able to perpetuate the Judaism for the next generation. That even though, yes, of course, we want Mashiach to come now and we're going to go to the promised land, but we have to plan that. We have to plan a little bit, not just even for when we won't be here, but even for people we cannot reach. We cannot reach every single person. Every single person, I think there's like studies about how many people you could be actively in touch with or actively impacting at one time. It's not possible for a rabbi in a community to impact every single person. It's not possible for you to impact every person, even in your own sphere. You might impact them in a small way. You might impact them, once in a while, but it's not possible for a person. A person has limited faculties, and therefore, what we have to do is not just lift people up to our level, but lift them up and give them the empowerment. Now you go and teach the next person, and you go and teach the next person, and you teach the next person, and they have to teach their people who they're teaching about Torah, about mitzvahs, about Judaism, about goodness, about kindness. All these things we have to keep empowering people, empowering people, empowering people, and that's how you perpetuate goodness, kindness, and godliness, Torah and Judaism, to the next generation, and to more people, and to more people, and to more people. And I think that the third thing that is really important that we can learn from this is that eventually we can actually get to the level of Moses, meaning that it's not that we lost out on the ability to get to an experiential level of Judaism, not just it's something we saw in a book, something that we heard, but how about to see it, to experience it for ourselves? And the truth is, through the small drip of teaching Torah and teaching Torah and teaching Torah and learning Torah and learning Torah and doing mitzvahs, through constantly doing it, eventually we get to the essence of it, and eventually we could get onto that level through because we're connected. In the end of the day, we're all connected to Moses, because Moses taught it to our teachers, who taught it to Moses taught it to his students, who taught it to his students, who are our teachers, and because of that, we are directly connected to Moses. And if some way he lifted them up, and they lifted their students up, and they lifted their students up, eventually that gets through. It's not a simple process, because we're not, like we said, Moses is not physically there in order to lift us up, and we can't physically experience and see godliness the way Moses did. But eventually it gets through, and we are lifted up because we are connected to that unbreakable chain between us, our teachers, and their teachers, and eventually Moses. So I think the lesson for us is that we all have to be teachers. We all have to find, whether it's our families, our spouse, our friend circle, our colleagues at work, whatever it may be, we have to find a way to impact someone else. We have to find a way to empower other people to teach about goodness, kindness, godliness, Torah, mitzvahs, and Judaism. Thank you very much. Have a wonderful Shabbos, and God willing, we'll see you next week. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe.